They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. On eBay, a picture is worth 1,000 sales. In this video, I'm going to show you my exact photo setup that I use to take photos of everything, from hard goods to clothing and everything in between. And if you stick around to the end, I'm going to share a few tips and tricks that I use that brought my photos and eBay listings to the next level. Before we jump into this, a quick disclaimer. You don't need any of this stuff or this setup or anything to be better than 90% of people on eBay when it comes to photographs. If you follow a few simple rules, you can beat out 90% of people on eBay with your photos. And those are just taking good, clean photos, taking lots of photos, and using good natural light and a clean background, and you will beat out a lot of your competition. When I first started out, I took my very first item and I used a sheet of white paper and I laid that item on a sheet of white paper. I used a room that had good natural light and I took the photograph there. So even though I'm going to share a bunch of stuff that will help bring your photos to the next level, just know that if you're starting out, all of this is unnecessary and you can start out with nothing other than the cell phone you have in your hand. But if you are ready to upgrade, let's jump right into how I came up with this setup. If you're like me and you sell everything, so clothing and hard goods and long items, short items, small items, big items, you sell everything, it's hard to find one setup that works well for you. A lot of people that sell clothing go with the flat lay, and if you don't have a lot of space, you can't really use the flat lay. And a lot of people for hard goods will go out and buy a light box, and although light boxes are great for taking photos, sometimes they're a little restricting and you can't fit the item that you want to take a photograph of in the light box. And once the light box gets dirty inside, it's hard to clean it or replace that sheet that comes with the light box. And you don't have a ton of space and you don't want to spend a ton of money on a professional photo setup. This is the setup you want. My setup takes up a space of 4 feet by 8 feet, and that's when it's fully spread out and being used for clothing. It takes up a lot less space when it's being used for hard goods, and you can push it against the wall and move it out of the way so that space isn't always being used just for the photo setup to live. This setup also costs under $200 to build, and I was able to save a lot of money because I had some of these items around the house, and you might also have some of these items around the house and can save on them. I have linked all the items that I use in the description and a pinned comment. So we have a blanket from Walmart that I used for the backdrop, and that's about a $5 blanket at Walmart. There's a similar one on Amazon for $13 if you don't want to drive to the store. A sheet of plywood will cost you about $25 at your local hardware store. The lights are $65 and they're on sale right now for Black Friday. The table that I use cost about $60 on Amazon. You might be able to find a used one or even have one from camping or just from yard sales or whatever. A piece of 2x4, that will cost you like $3, $4 at the hardware store. A package of bar clamps, those will cost you about $30 right now on Amazon. Some sheets of paper for the backdrop for hard goods, those will cost you a few dollars at your local dollar store. And then you need some kind of weight in order to keep the table from sliding out from the wall. I personally use some weights from my gym, but you can also use some books or some canned goods, anything that's heavy that you can put on the table to keep it from sliding. So let's go take a look at the clothing setup right now. So this is a sheet of plywood that I cut down to 4x4. 4 feet by 4 feet is about the perfect length. You will have some items that are a little bit longer. If you get pants that are a little bit longer and you want an overall picture of the pants, you can kind of just fold up the ends like that. But 4x4 works really well for most clothing that you're going to find at the thrift store or at yard sales. So once I cut the board, I just took a blanket that I purchased from Walmart. It's a gray blanket, and I wrapped it around the board and I stapled it to the back. So the sheet of plywood is resting on a table, and I simply have a 2x4 on the edge of the table here, and I use some clamps to hold that 2x4 to the table, and this rests onto the 2x4 here, and then it also just goes onto the wall on the back. There's nothing on the wall back there, it's just resting against the wall, and that tension keeps it there. The other key item that I do have is some weight, because this table will slide out for you. So I just stuck some weights back here on the table and it keeps it from pushing out. The other cool thing about this is if you're taking photos of something slippery and it keeps sliding down, instead of having to put it on a hanger or use another setup, I can just pull this table out and adjust how much it lays. It will almost go to a complete flat lay, and I don't have to take up that much space with it, because when I don't need it like a flat lay like this, I can actually push this up a little bit more. Those jeans stick really, really well, so I don't actually have to have it at this angle. I could push it up a little bit more and almost take it at a more vertical angle. So I also like this setup because when I'm taking photos of the clothing here, right underneath, I have a lot of open space that I can use to store some bins and other items. So typically I'll have two bins here. I'll have one of clothing or hard goods that's unlisted and one of the stuff that's listed, and I'll just keep moving it over, and I'll be able to keep track of which items have already been listed and which items need to go be put away in storage. So as you can see, I just have a 2x4 here on the table. I use some bar clamps to clamp it down, and that just keeps this from sliding off the table here. And then at the top here, this just rests against the wall, and I can just lift this up and adjust the table in or out depending on if I want the item more at a vertical angle or more at a flat lay angle. And that will kind of depend on if the item is slippery or not, or what angle I need of the item. When taking pictures of clothing, I like to have a few tools on hand. So I like to have a lint roller ready to go. I like to have a pair of scissors for any loose threads. And I like to have a ruler so that I can take measurements of clothing. So like on pants, you want to make sure you can measure the inseam and along the top here. And sometimes you want to measure this way as well too. I also highly recommend a fabric shaver. This is a tool that I can use for like sweaters or anything that has a bunch of pilling, and I just run it and it will take all that pilling right off, and I don't have to sit there and peel it off by hand. Did you guys know that just in this last month that 1,700 of you guys are returning viewers, which means that you have watched more than one of my videos? I have to ask, what are you guys waiting for? Go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any future content. All right, so great. You guys have seen the photo setup for clothing, but I'm sure you're wondering, how does this work for hard goods? Well, this setup wouldn't work for hard goods, but this setup transitions into a setup that works really well for hard goods, and it transitions pretty quickly, which is what I like about it. Because I'm an everything seller, I end up with a bunch of clothing, a bunch of shoes, a bunch of video games, a bunch of other hard goods, electronics, baseball bats, you name it, I end up with it. So what I end up doing is I end up batching out my listings. So maybe on Monday, I'll do all my clothing listings. So I'll bring in totes of clothing and I'll sit here and I'll take all my clothing photos. And then on another day, I'll transition this into a hard goods setup. I'll bring in a bunch of hard goods and I'll go through all my hard goods. I usually try to save up enough to make it worth the transition, but honestly, this transition goes pretty quick. So let's get right into it. The first thing I'm going to do is just move these lights right out of the way so I don't bump them and knock them over. And then I'm going to reach behind the table here. I'm going to pull out these weights. Once the weights are off, all I do is I lift up the here and I push the table back. And I put the board against the back wall there. Now that that board is up against the back wall there, I'm going to remove the clamps for this piece of wood here. I move the wood out of the way. I grab my sheets of paper, and this is just poster board that I grabbed from the dollar store. I'll move my lights in for a little bit better photos. And that's pretty much it. I just transitioned from the clothing setup to the actual setup of hard goods. And the good thing about this, as you can see, is it's 4 feet long. So a lot of golf clubs and baseball bats will actually still fit on this setup, and I can take the whole photo of it with a nice white clean background. The only other thing that I'll do if I'm leaving it like this, if I'm going to be doing hard goods for a few days in a row, is I'll take a little bit of tape and I'll just run a little bit of tape along the top there against the board, just so that those sheets don't fall down while I'm not in the room, or they don't get bent from hanging out like that. But they'll stay in place like that pretty well, even without the tape. But it just takes 2 seconds just to add a little bit of tape right there, and that just keeps it from falling down. So now, as you can see, we transitioned from that gray background, which I like for clothing because it helps the clothing stand out a little bit better, to a nice clean white background for all your hard goods. And I'm using the same lights, I'm using the same board, I'm using the same table, and it's just super easy, quick transition. I still have the space underneath for laying things out and organizing what's coming and going. And as you can see, you can set all different kinds of items on here and get really good photos of the items using that white background. So you might be thinking, why don't you just use a light box? Well, the thing I don't like about the light boxes is how restricting it is. This leaves it open to fitting any kind of item that I need to on this table. Basically anything 4 feet by 3 feet I can fit on the table, and that's the majority of the items that I get. And it's also super cheap and easy to just replace these pieces of paper. When you buy a light box that comes with that nice clean white background, well, as you start putting shoes in there and everything, it gets all scuffed up. So like here, I had a bunch of books I was listing and the books were red, and you can see all the red just showed up on this paper. This paper now can just go in the trash, or I'll use it for other items that are also dirty that I don't want to use a nice new clean sheet for. But it's super nice to not have to spend the time cleaning the light box and just be able to replace the sheets of paper as needed. And then when I'm taking photos of hard goods, I like to have a few tools on hand. So I always have a ruler so that I can get measurements in the photos. I'll also have a tape measure for those longer items, so like a baseball bat or whatever, golf club, I can get a longer measurement. I like to have one of the Scotty peelers that can help me remove a sticker that I might have missed. It can also help me just clean some gunk off of an item. A pair of scissors if I need to cut something off of the item or repair the item in some way. And I also like to keep some magic erasers around, because if there's something just on the item, I can just wipe it off real quick. I don't have to go back out and clean the item. I can clean it right here while it's sitting here being ready to be photographed. And I do have a link in the description for everything that I'm talking about, anything from the lights to the bar clamps. You can go on that link and purchase any of those items if you want to build this setup and make it work for you. If you have any questions about this setup or taking photos in general, drop those comments down below. I do my best to answer all comments. And do me a favor and hit that like and subscribe button. All right, so now that you've seen my 2 photo setups that I use to take photos of hard goods and clothing, let's jump into some tips and tricks on how to take better photos than 90% of people on eBay. Your first photo is the most important photo. So personally, I'll spend the most time getting that first photograph perfect, and then the rest I'll just blaze through, because no one's going to pick apart all the other photos, and no one through scrolling is going to see any of the other photos other than that first one. So spend your time on that first photo, get a really good, clean first photo, and then blaze through the rest of the photographs. On my first photo, I like to get the whole item in the photo and not leave any white space, or leave as little white space as possible. So that means the item takes up essentially the whole photograph. I also like that first photo to show everything that's included. So if it's a video game, I'm going to open up that video game, I'm going to pull the manual out, I'm going to pull the disc out, and I'm going to put the case there, and I'm going to take a photograph of it all. So when they're scrolling through, that they know that that video game has the manual, has the disc, and has the case. They're not just seeing the front case. My listing now stands out to them, as I don't have to be a detective. I don't have to go digging and find out what's included. I can see it right here. I'm going to buy it right now. And this goes for hard goods and electronics that come in open boxes. So I'll pull everything out of the box, I'll lay it out, and that will be my first photo 9 times out of 10. There are some exceptions to that rule that I make, but if I can lay everything out and show exactly what's included in that first photo, it tells the buyer that this one is complete, or even if it's not complete, it shows what it's missing right from the start, and that buyer will make that decision right then and there, versus having to click on your listing and dig through the photos to find out what's in the box. Is the box complete? I like to show them right from the start. The next tip is to take a clean, concise photo. So that means stop taking your photos on top of all your other clothing. I see some photos online where the person just takes a photo and it's sitting on a pile of laundry. No one wants to see your dirty laundry. No one wants to see a cluttered background. It's fine if you don't have a photo set up. I didn't have a photo set up for a long time. I used the hardwood floors in my house. I laid the item out. I made sure there was good natural lighting in the room, and I took the photograph that way. I personally prefer a clean white or gray background. I don't like the AI backgrounds. I don't like the photograph being taken outside unless it's like a tent or something that you have to set up outside. I don't like the photos where you take it and you add some kind of weird background to it. It clutters up the photo. It doesn't make it look professional. That's just my personal opinion. But I try to copy what Amazon listings look like. Amazon sells so much more than eBay ever will. So I try to copy Amazon as much as I can. Amazon always has a nice white clean background of the item, and you know exactly what you're going to get. I don't like the AI backgrounds. I think they look cheap. I think they make your item look cheap. I know some people will lay it out on wood, even though they have a background that they could use. They'd rather lay it out on a sheet of wood to make it look fancier than it is. If that's what you're going for, the boutique style, like the Etsy style, that might work. But if you're just selling video games and clothing, I think a clean background is key. You also want to take as many photos as you can. I don't think there's too many photos. eBay gives you the ability to upload a lot of photos to a listing. Use it. I take photos of every single thing, every angle, a close-up, a far away. I pull the items out of the box. I take pictures of all the individual items. I take pictures of any writing, any flaws I'll point at, and I'll take a picture of the flaw. I like to think like the buyer thinks. If I'm the buyer, what do I want to see? I want to see the front. I want to see the back. I want to see the bottom of the shoes. I want to see inside the shoes. I want to see the heel, the inside heel on the shoe, because sometimes people will slide in and out and they'll wear that heel out on the back. So I want to see all that as the buyer. So if you want to beat out your competition, have more photos. If you're getting a bunch of people that are asking you for more photos and they're saying, hey, can you send me a picture of the sleeve cuff? Can you send me a picture of the inside tag? Can you send me a picture of this item inside the box? Can you send me the picture of the underside of the shoes? I used to run out when I got those messages and pull the item, take the photos, send it to the buyer. And I realized that 9 times out of 10, I was either too late or the buyer had moved on and went and bought another item. So I don't even bother with that anymore. When someone messages me and says, hey, can I see the bottom of the shoe, or can I see inside this shoe, or can I see the tag? I just make note of it. So next time I'm taking photos of shoes or video games or whatever, I remember that, hey, there was that one buyer that wanted this photo of it, and I'm gonna start taking photos of that on every listing that I do. Because if one person asked you, it means that there was a lot of people that wanted that photo that never even bothered to message you and ask you. So that's how I learned which photos to take and which photos to add to my listings, was by just listening to the customer. If they're asking for these photos, start putting them in your listing. Like I said, I don't bother going out and taking individual photos for customers anymore. I never see it convert to a sale, so it's just time wasted. And for me to go out to my inventory and pull the item out and take the photo and then put it back away, it's a lot of time waste. So in my mind, I know that item will sell to another buyer at a later point, and I'm just going to focus on improving the process moving forward. Also, you have to be honest with your photographs. If I have a flaw in a piece of clothing, or a chip on a collectible, or a tear in a box or packaging, I'm not only going to write about it in the description, I'm going to take a clear photo of whatever that flaw is, the stain or whatever, and I'm going to point at it. I'm going to use my finger and point at it, or I'm going to use a ruler and point at it, or I'm going to put a ruler next to it so you have a measurement of how big the rip is. I want that buyer, if he's just scrolling through the 20 photos that I have listed, I want him to scroll through and see my finger or that measuring tape and say, wait, what was that? And realize that that flaw was there. A lot of times buyers don't read the description on eBay. So even though you wrote it in the description, and I highly recommend that you do describe it in the description and condition notes, you have to take a clear photo of it, and you have to draw attention to that photo. We don't want buyers getting items and tricking them into buying something with a flaw. We want to be upfront with the flaw. These items will sell, so there's no point in hiding it and making it out to be something that it's not. The buyer's going to complain. You're going to get negative feedback. You're going to get a return. You're going to get an INAD. This is all things that eBay keeps track of. So be honest, be upfront with the customer, and let them know. Remember, you're a customer sometimes too, and you would want to know exactly what you're getting. And if there's a flaw in it, you're going to want to know that. You might still buy it, at least you know that flaw exists. Another thing I like to do when taking photos is to organize the photos in the way that a customer would look at an item inside a store. So let's say it's a t-shirt. There's the t-shirt, so their first photo is going to be the overview of the t-shirt. You're going to want that t-shirt to fit in your first photo and leave as little space as you can. Be as zoomed in on the shirt as you can without being fully zoomed in so that you can't see the whole item. So your first photo is an overview. That second photo I'm going to have as an up close of maybe the graphic or the collar area. The third photo is going to be the tag, because as a customer at the store, I see the item, I'm drawn into it, I pick it up, I might look at it a little bit closer. Now I'm looking to see what size it is and what brand it is, so I want to see the tag next. And then I want to see the other distinguishing factors, so maybe like the sleeves and the cuff, and maybe there's a pocket I want to look at. Then I want to see, is there any flaws on this item, so I'm going to point out the flaws. And then I want to know, is this item going to fit me? Where's the measurement? So I'm going to have measurement photos. Okay, now I'm going to flip the item over. I'm going to look at the back of the item. And then maybe I want to see the inside tag to know exactly what material it's made out of or what model number this item is. So I organize my photos in that pattern so that the customer doesn't have to dig through a bunch of photos that they don't find necessary right at the beginning. So there are some customers that want to see that inside tag, but there's a lot less customers that want to see that inside tag and a lot more customers that want to see that graphic up close. So that graphic up close photo is going to be towards the front of my photos, and that inside tag is going to be at the back. And that's just so that it helps that customer that wants to see the graphic. He doesn't have to scroll past the inside tag and the measurements and stuff. He wants to know that he wants the item first, and then he wants to know if the item fits, and then maybe he wants to see the model number. You also want to include measurements in your photos. So there's some items that don't need measurements. No, you don't need to take a measurement of the disc for the video game, and you don't need to take a measurement of the case for the video game. But clothing is a necessity. You have to take measurements of the clothing for people to buy your clothing. There's a lot of people out there that aren't going to buy clothes online without seeing the actual measurements. So learn what those measurements are. For jeans, you're going to want to measure the waist. You're going to want to measure the inseam. For a shirt, you're going to want to measure pit to pit and then the total length of it. For long dress shirts, you're going to want to measure the sleeve length. There's a lot of measurements out there because clothes fit people differently. So if you have a customer that reach out and says, how does this item fit? You can easily recommend that they go into their closet, pull out a shirt that they like to wear, and take measurements how you took the measurements, and then they'll be able to compare the two and see how the shirt that they want to buy is going to fit compared to the shirt that they like or the shirt that they already have. This also goes for some hard goods, so a lot of collectibles or antiques and things like that, the size might matter. So if you're selling Department 56 houses, people want to know what the size is. If you're selling model trains, people want to know what the size is. A lot of times they'll have a size scale, but people might not be familiar with that size scale, and they just want an overall idea of how big this item is. So anytime I'm selling something like that, I'm going to throw a ruler down next to it and take at least one picture with the scale size in it. You also have to learn whatever tool you're using. I personally still just use my cell phone. I find that it's the easiest thing. I know how to use my cell phone, and I think cell phones take great photos nowadays, and there's not really a need to run out and buy a new digital camera or a fancy DSLR camera or anything like that. I get by with just my cell phone. I think a lot of resellers use their cell phone. I know it's becoming more popular to go out and buy a digital camera now. I'm not quite sure what the advantage is over that. But whatever tool you're using, you need to learn how to use the tool. So if it's your phone, figure out what you need to adjust on your phone to get the right photos. So sometimes it's hard to get photos of clothing and show the color accurately. I know for my phone, I have to turn the exposure up a little bit, and that kind of helps me get the actual color of the clothing so that whatever shows up on the screen is what the clothing looks like in real life. Sometimes you have to change the lights that you're using. So the lights that I have behind me, they come with remotes that you can adjust all the different features on, so you can turn up and down the brightness. Sometimes that helps. I also like turning off all the lights in the room. So I'll close the blinds, I'll turn off the overhead light. Any outside light other than the lights that you're using can really throw off the color and the photo quality that you're taking. And this goes for no matter what you're using. If you're using natural light, try to make sure that you're using the same natural light throughout all your different photos. Don't take one photo in this room and then go to another room to take another photo. You want to stay as consistent as you can so that your store looks consistent and that the photos of the item all look consistent. You want your item to reflect how it looks in real life. I also, with my phone, I turn on 1:1 mode, so eBay takes your photo and will crop it down, or you'll have to crop it down if you're using some other mode. So I just do that automatically. I go into my phone and I turn it on to 1:1, so it's a nice square, and then when I'm taking that photo, I see exactly how it's going to look like on eBay, and that really helps me. So like for t-shirts and stuff, I can frame it right in there, and I don't have to go in and add another step later of cropping down my image to make it fit and make it look good. Another thing I like about the phone is sometimes if you can't get the color quite right, or the image is like a little off, all you have to do is just tap on the screen outside. So like sometimes I'll like aim it at the white background or the gray background, and I'll just tap it on the screen and it will refocus itself and readjust itself, and then I'll come back to the clothing, and that helps fix it sometimes. And sometimes no matter what you do, you can't get that color quite right. You're like, man, this looks a little more pink on the phone or on the computer than it should. It's a little more red. Just write about it in the condition and the seller notes. I just put a quick note in all of my clothing listings under the seller notes and in the description saying we do our best to provide accurate photos of all our items. Please note clothing is photographed using photography lighting, and color and shade may vary under natural lighting. This is important because when I'm taking photos under that and then I pull it out over here, it may look slightly different, but I like using the photo lights. It brightens the item, it shows the item off really well. That is the actual color of the item. If you were taking the photo to put on the website of whatever brand you're buying, they're taking it under photography lighting as well. When I'm taking photos, I also like to stay super organized. So I have my bins underneath that I use to separate what's being listed versus what's already been listed. And I also like to have all my tools out and ready to go so that I know exactly where everything is in the process and what needs to be photographed and what doesn't. And I don't have my inventory in here, so I don't just stand up and put the item away. I build up a bunch of inventory and then I take it out to my garage where I store everything. So I have to stay super organized, and I do that with my inventory management system. And if you're interested in learning about my inventory and how I manage it, be sure to hit that like and subscribe button, because I am working on a video currently on how I inventory my item and how I keep track of all my items. So if that's something that interests you, be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss that video. I like having all those tools ready to go. So the things like the ruler and the tape measure and the scissors and the lint roller and the little Scotty peeler and a magic eraser, all of those tools ready to go so that if I see a flaw in here, I don't have to take it back to the cleaning station and re-clean the item and then bring it back in here and photograph it. This item should be ready to be photographed when I bring it in here. Everything's already been cleaned, tested, and working, and when I bring it in here, it should be clean, tested, and ready to be photographed. But sometimes I miss things. I want to have those tools in here so that I don't have to go backwards in the process, that I can just take care of it right here, right now. I also like to keep batteries in here because I don't ship the items with batteries in them. I don't store the items with batteries in them. I always tell people that the item doesn't come with batteries. The only exception is if it's like a dedicated battery pack to the item. But if it's just like your AA's, AAA's, or anything like that, I don't want to be storing items with batteries. They go bad, they corrode, they damage the item. I don't want to have to remember to put them back in the item before I ship them out. But I want to take pictures of the item working. So like if it's a calculator, I'm going to have the batteries in here so that when I'm ready to take the photographs of it, I put the batteries in, I take the photographs of it, I take the batteries back out, I get that item inventoried and then ready to be put away and hopefully sold and shipped out to a customer. The biggest tip I can recommend is don't overthink this. It's simple. You're just taking a photograph of an item to show someone else what it is so that they want that item. That is it. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't overthink it. I know sometimes we get so lost in our thoughts and we're like, oh man, this photo isn't quite right. I can't get the color just right. I can't show this flaw just perfectly. That's what words are for. So if you can't photograph the flaw, you can't get the shade quite right, any of those things, just write about it in the description, in the condition notes. You can even put it in the title. So if it's showing up a little pink, but it's actually red, just make sure you put red right in the title. Make sure that you write this item is red in the description. There's ways around it. So don't get hung up on little things. Don't worry about going out and buying a brand new camera and getting the perfect lighting and having this and that. I want you to be able to do this, and you can do this by just using your cell phone, natural lighting, and a clean backdrop. Your clean backdrop can be your kitchen counter if you clean everything off of it. It could be your wood floor. It could be your carpet floor. It could be a blanket that you lay out on the ground. Any of those things work. Just use a clean background. Use the tools that you already have, your phone, your light in your bedroom, the light coming in the window, and get used to taking those photos. Don't run out and copy my setup. My setup works really well for me, and I recommend it for some people. There's some people that this isn't going to work for. Maybe you only sell one kind of item and it works perfect in a light box. That's perfect. Use the light box. Maybe you only sell clothing and you have the space for a nice flat lay. Go with the nice flat lay if you're only selling clothing and you have the space for it. There's no need to copy what everyone else does. There's no need to run out and buy the best camera. It's really not that difficult to take good photos and beat out 90% of your competition. Remember that more photos is better than perfect photos. So if you take 10 good photographs of the item and your competition takes 3 perfect photographs of the item, your photos are still better because you showed more angles of that item, you showed more flaws, more condition, more of what's included, more of the writing on the box, whatever it is, you showed more to that customer, and that customer just wants to hold that item in their hand virtually and look at that item. So if you're only taking 3 good photos and you're spending all day taking those photos and getting them just right, you're wasting your time. Focus on that first photo and then blaze through the rest and take as many good photos as you can. Good photos beat out perfect photos every time. If you enjoyed this video, YouTube thinks you're going to enjoy this one, so go ahead and click it.